A new generation of House Democrats wants to hold the line against incoming Trump administration. But change in Washington, folks, it just doesn't come without a fight. Congresswoman Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez and Congressman Jerry Connolly are battling it out to serve as the top Democrat on the Oversight Committee. It's a very important committee. Political reports, they are both projecting confidence about their chances. AOC has the backing of the Progressive Caucus, while former Speaker Nancy Pelosi is reportedly behind the scenes yet again to boost Connolly. A vote is expected next week. Whoever wins will take over the role from Jamie Raskin, who is set to replace Jerry Nadler as the top Democrat on the Judiciary Committee. Back with us, Julian Castro and Kimberly Atkins-Stohr.
It's given generational battle.
Generational push.
You know, Secretary Castro, I'm just wondering, I think for a lot of people that read this news, I remember when Congresswoman Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez was first elected. And to see just it's not I don't want to call it a shift, but I think to see the growth, frankly, in the Democratic caucus and how young leaders are now, you don't have to wait, you know, you don't have to be in Congress 15, 20 years to serve in leadership, or even have the potential, the ability to serve in leadership, I think is amazing. What do you think about these developments?
Yeah, I mean, Simone, as you know, this has been a long time in coming, right? For years, the word out there about Democrats in Congress has been that the leadership, while respected, fantastic, has helped make a lot of progress, also has been there a long time. And the question had been, of course, for Speaker, when there might be new young leadership. That was provided with Hakeem Jeffries as minority leader, hopefully one day the Speaker. And now the question is everything underneath that, all of these committee chairs. And in the Democratic Party, in the Democratic caucus, basically people are able to sit there for a long time. And so I think it's inevitable, though, after an election where you had voters send a strong message, that Democrats need to adjust their message, and they need, I think, more of a fighting spirit and a focus like I think AOC and others have had. So I'm hopeful that you're going to see some turnover here. As much respect as I have for Congressman Connolly and others, I think it's time in many of these instances to see that turnover.
Kim, I want to read you some analysis from our friends and colleagues Scott Wong and Sahil Kapoor. This was a piece they ran in NBC News. A Democrat working in the Biden administration said the phenomenon is fueled by the Biden debacle in the election, which taught younger Democrats that their leaders won't willingly step aside and sometimes need to be elbowed out. I would layer onto that the fact that, as we often talk about, when you talk about Democrats going up against MAGA Republicans, it is an asymmetric playing field. And yet one of the things we have seen on the Republican side is a new wave of voices coming in, many of whom understand how to harness the power of new media platforms. They know how to get their message out to new messengers. I also think there is the added value. In a best case scenario, you would have some of these younger members taking over under the tutelage of members who have the experience and know what they are doing. So, yeah, I think part of it is maybe some of what we saw in this past election, but I think it's more complicated than that.
I agree totally, Alicia. I think in this case, it's more of a generational shift. I think a lot of people cry ageism and that this is somehow disrespectful to other members in the House. I don't see that at all. I think what Congresswoman AOC has done and done really well is really grow as not only a politician, but as a tactician.
Yes.
in lawmaking. You know, when she first was elected, I remember that too. I talked to a lot of people on the Democratic side who thought, you know, she's smart and she's fun, but you know what, she'll learn. She needs to know her place. She carved out her own place. She learned how to talk to and other members, how to galvanize support, how to reach across the aisle when it was strategic to do so, how to push back when it was strategic to do so too. She's a very, very smart person. And so I think her leadership, particularly on a committee like Oversight, which honestly has sort of lost some of its power, I think, recently, and doesn't have quite the push that it used to. But it's so important in a Trump administration, especially, to have someone smart and fiery at the helm to do what is necessary to push back at overreach from the incoming administration. So I think she would be a great job, with absolutely no disrespect to Congressman Connolly.
Julian, all of that is very good, but the brutal reality is that Hakeem Jeffries will be as old as Nancy Pelosi is before he becomes Speaker if they don't get their act together.
I was like, what?
So that's just the truth of it, right? So how's this generation going to play the game, to Alicia's very important point that I don't think people should gloss over. You're playing against an asymmetrical opponent who doesn't give a damn about the rules, doesn't give a damn about the process, and doesn't give a damn about you. So you are the obstacle in the game. So how does this generation, I do see that fight in an AOC. I've seen that fight in other members in the House, younger members of the Black Caucus, for example. How do you assess that aspect of the game if Hakeem Jeffries will become Speaker before he's 80?
I hope it's not going to take that long, Mark.
Well,
but,
y'all don't seem to know how to play the game. So y'all were supposed to win the House in this last election. So you tell me, sir.
Yeah, so look, I mean, as was said, right, like these are folks I think that can deliver the message, the Democratic message, more compellingly. They understand the platforms, as Alicia said, the new media, the way that it works today. I think also that they've remained close to their constituents. They still have their ear to the ground. You know how important that is in politics. You know, what you hear people talking about, what resonates with people. And I think, unfortunately, and I don't think this just goes for Congress, I think that this goes in politics in general. The longer that you stay in office and you don't have to run, for instance, a real election campaign, the more you tend to get disconnected from that reality and those constituents and what they're talking about and so forth. That doesn't happen with everybody, but that happens most of the time. But so I think these younger members, they can take the fight, they know the message, they're closer to the ground, they know the new media. That adds up, I think, to being able to be more effective and to go up against a Jim Jordan or go up against any number of folks on the MAGA side that are younger and be more successful. And one by one, when you get that, and that's the image of the party, and it resonates more, that's how you're going to have success. And Hakeem Jeffries will be the Speaker well before he's 80 years old.
Michael trying to put that bad juju on the Democratic
I'm just
leader.
trying to acknowledge that the juju exists.
Well, and I mean, look, I think the reality is, and we often talk about it, look, the implications of this last election, I've been talking to a bunch of DNC members as they are gearing up for their DNC chair race. And there are camps of people that believe, oh, you got to throw out the playbook, everything's wrong. But there's a lot of DNC members that I've spoken to that said, look, people need to pump the brakes and go back to the basics here. And I think that applies for what is happening in Congress. There ain't no guardrails, folks. Right. The guardrails, because the guardrails that did exist, and one could argue they do still exist, they're not laws. They're just norms we all adhere to until someone decides they don't want to adhere to them anymore. So, Kim, it seems to me that this rise of not just Congresswoman Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, but Maxwell Frost, right? Congressman out of Florida, under the tutelage and the leadership of Democratic leader Hakeem Jeffries, in the face, oftentimes, of some older members that don't like. I mean, Speaker Nancy Pelosi is not supportive of Congresswoman Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez. Right. You know, I don't like to speak ill of folks while they're sick. She was hospitalized. Speaker Pelosi was over during her congressional visit to Luxembourg, Germany this year. But her staff says earlier this week, her staff says she's working from the hospital. But two things can be true. I'm glad she's all right. But also, she's not here for this generational shift.
Yeah. Well, I think what is most important for Democrats right now, coming out of the 2024 election, is learning how to message. Whatever you can say about Republicans, they are very good at messaging. And so I think Democrats need to get their best and brightest messengers out front. And I think that the Congresswoman is a good example of somebody who is in that field. She's very good at messaging. She's very good at crystallizing and making clear how what is happening affects Americans, affects people on the ground, not just the lofty ideals that Democrats tend to speak in. You know, they tend to speak in broad terms that makes them seem elite and out of touch. She doesn't do that. I think Democrats need more of that, and whoever can deliver that message, put them out front often, and give them a big platform.
More Democrats who go to Costco. That's what I like to say. And who like Dunkin' Donuts? Like the chairman, he brought us Dunkin' Donuts this morning.